Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So there was a gentleman in Toronto, Ontario, Mississauga that I ran into in business and in politics and in education a couple of times that I was always incredibly impressed with. He was just one of those guys that had it. He was charismatic. He was a leader. He was gifted with the verbal word. And now I found out he's gifted with the written word because he's now written a book. And it's called I Thought He Was Dead. Ralph Benmurgui has joined us tonight. Ralph, how are you?
I'm good, Brian. How are you?
Very well. Welcome to the show. Tell me, what's the book about? I Thought He Was Dead.
Well, I got the title, which my wife doesn't like, but I got the title from, when you, for instance, Mort Saul, the comedian, just passed away, right? 91 years old. And when you tell people who knew anything about Mort Saul as a seminal comedian, a political comedian, that he just died, they're like, he just died? I thought he was dead. Because that's what happens when you sort of stay out of the public spotlight for a while. And I've been out of the main public spotlight for over a decade. So every once in a while, somebody would be introduced to me and I'd say, hi, I'm Ralph Benmurgui. And they'd look at me and I'd realize they were thinking, I thought he was dead. So I used it because it's really also about getting older. And a fair bit of the book is about transitioning from just aging to saging, to taking your life and making new purpose out of it as you get into the autumn of your life. Because ageism is kind of the last acceptable ism. It's okay to think if someone is 67 or 68 that, they had their run. Go play golf. I don't like golf. So for me, it's always been a question of how do you find renewed purpose? You were something, you are something, don't take yourself too seriously, but do find a way to find passion again in your life. And also to elbow your way back into the conversation about being worth it, being somebody who still has things to contribute. We live longer than we used to, so we might as well make the most of it.
Ageism and Sageism. That's interesting words. The descriptor that the former Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, wrote is Ralph Benmurgui's book is a gift to all of us who, like him, are in the autumn of our lives and to anyone who is planning to someday get there. He writes with the timing of a performer, the compassion of a loving friend, and the wisdom of a different kind of rabbi. Ralph asks how we can bring our wisdom to the table. This book is, in part, his personal answer to that question. So what's your personal wisdom that you're bringing to the table?
I think it's that we have to find our wisdom, and that you're not, just because you're older, it doesn't mean, like there's lots of dumb older people and lots of dumb younger people. You have to do something conscious as you enter into autumn. You can't just sort of back into it because you're afraid one day you'll have to admit that you're getting older and God forbid you might die one day. We're all going to die. That's not the issue. The question is, what are you going to do with yourself? So I ask people fundamental questions like, who do you love? What are you most proud of? What do you regret? And how do you want to be remembered? And if you could write all that out, you have the beginnings of a conscious attempt at making your life worthwhile, not just to yourself, but to the people around you. So,
okay, that's good. Let's repeat those if you could.
Okay. Who do you love?
Who do you love?
And what are you most proud of?
What are you most proud of?
And then what do you regret? And whenever somebody says, oh, I have no regrets, I think, wow, that's quite the trick. It's almost impossible not to have regrets, but get them out. What are the regrets? You don't want to mumble them as you're dying one day. You want to deal with them.
And what's the benefit of dealing with your regrets?
Because you clean the container of yourself. You get to a point where you can say, okay, I might need to make amends with some people. For instance, I regret the way I treated someone in my life. I regret that I didn't have enough time with someone in my life. So you find a way to correct those things. And then the last part is, what do you want to be remembered for? So that when it's over, all that you have left with people is the memory of you. And you want that to be a good memory. So you got to work at it. And the other part of it is that as you cultivate, as you take inventory this way, you can begin to spend your time contemplating. You know, the Hindus have an approach that says in the younger part of your life, you're a householder. You're creating a family, you're trying to get yourself a house, you're doing all the things you're supposed to do. But as you get older, you are a forest dweller. You go out into the forest to contemplate life because you have more expansive views of what life's about. You've lived enough of it to know, because some wisdom you can't get until you get there.
We're chatting tonight with Ralph Benmurgui, who is the author of a book. Ralph, what's the book's title?
I Thought He Was Dead.
I Thought He Was Dead. I've had people say, didn't you used to be Brian Crombie? So it's sort of, I guess, the same.
It's exactly the same thing.
And where can one get I Thought He Was Dead by Ralph Benmurgui?
You can look any local bookstore, you can order it, or you can go on Amazon or Indigo. They have it as well.
We're going to take some minutes for some messages and come back more with Ralph Benmurgui, the author of I Thought He Was Dead, in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is the author of a new book called I Thought He Was Dead, Ralph Benmurgui, who has really quite the illustrious career. I got to tell you a little bit about it. He, for the last 13 years, has run his own business called Blue Fez Productions Limited, where he's been a podcast creator and host, a strategic communications consultant, doing external relations, strategic planning, innovation, and creative problem solving for communications and government relations, and was executive advisor to the president. I think that may have been at Sheridan College, where I ran across you on some things that we were working on, Ralph. Before that, he was director of communications for the Green Party of Ontario. He was director of communications in the government of Ontario. He was an executive advisor for the Green Party of Canada. He was a host on Jazz FF1, FM 91. He was a host and producer for 19 years at the CBC, where he was involved in current affairs and a variety host and an executive producer. Really an unbelievably interesting career in communications and media and Green Party.
Yeah, lots of stuff. It's funny when you hear it all out loud. It's like, wow, that's crazy. But you know what? In a way, they're all connected. A lot of it was about finding ways to reach people, communicating with people, finding ways to try to make a difference with people. And I've been lucky. I've had some wonderful experiences and journeys through the years. Part of it, what I learned, one of the things I learned, I have to say, and I write about it in the book, is I don't think we value the work life the way we should. I don't think it has a soulful piece to it anymore. I always used to use the example of you're driving to work someplace and Stairway to Heaven is on and you're listening to it on the radio and you're into it. And you're just like, dun, 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 dun. And then you stop in the parking lot and you turn the car off and you turn to yourself and go, okay, you stay in here. I'm going into work. So you can leave that part of you that has that passion and that love in the car because the work isn't loyal to you and you find yourself not being as loyal to the work. That we take one piece of people and say, this is all we want from you. And we're just going to pound away at it until you finally go. And I think that work should be special. I'll give you an example of something that I always thought was sad. You get an email at an organization at 2 PM. It says, come to the boardroom to say goodbye to Brian. He's retiring. Pizza will be provided. So you go to the boardroom and there's a couple of boxes of cold pizza there and you eat one because it's 2 PM. You're kind of hungry. And you talk to a few people about stuff and then you go over to Brian and you give him a little pat on the back and you go, hey man, you keep in touch, okay? And you never see Brian again because it was work that brought you together. The proximity was the friendship in most cases. Imagine if you didn't do that. Imagine if there were 4 or 5 people that you said to them, I'd love to just sit in a circle with these people and each tell a story about us together somewhere in this work life that we've had. And then everybody goes around the table or around the circle and tells their story. You know, Brian and I once, they show you a Hertz rent-a-car key fob, and they go, we rented a car. We were supposed to be at this meeting in Banff. We got out at Calgary. We got lost. We missed everything except the last 5 minutes of the meeting. And we tried to pretend as if it was all planned. So everybody laughs, you have a good time, right? So you go all the way around the room and everybody gets to tell a story. And then you get to tell a story that thanks all of them for being part of your life, because work is a part of people's lives. And in some cases, a bigger part than their family life. So why not honor that? Why not ask people when they're finished working at an organization to form a wisdom council so that they can actually share their experience instead of being shown the door and being, you know, we won't be needing you anymore. Don't worry about it. We don't value people in their work, and we don't find a way to actually bring out the best in them so that we see more than the one single thing we hired them for. The chapter in the book is called When You Work, There's Always a Tomorrow. Because an old colleague from the CBC and I were having coffee in Dundas. I live in Hamilton. And he said that. And he said, you know, these days I'm 69 years old. Nobody wants to hire a 69-year-old documentarian. So I don't have a tomorrow to wake up for. And sometimes it's tough. So I wish we could find ways to revalue ourselves throughout our work lives, including when we leave that place of work that we were used to, that business card that we were defined by.
You've worked with and for some really interesting leaders. Do you stay in touch with them? And is that part of the Wisdom Council?
I worked with Benmurgui for the Liberal Party because he was the greenest guy I knew there. I worked with Elizabeth May as a senior advisor for a year and a half or 2 years before she actually got elected. And I work with Mike Schreiner from the Green Party of Ontario because I think he's a quality guy. I like working for people. I don't go, oh, I have to work for this party. I'll never work for that, except I never worked for the Conservative Party. I've never done that, but I've worked with everyone else. And I love doing that because I love helping people to create a communication that's effective. So if I'm working with someone, I'll say, I'd really appreciate it if we think about not using the word taxpayer. And they go, well, what do you mean? And you go, because if you say it's taxpayers' money, the taxpayer deserves this. Look, that's a customer asking as customer service from a government. In the meantime, they don't want to pay any more taxes, but they sure want the services. So you're now commodifying people, telling them they're just a taxpayer. If you're a citizen, you pay taxes, yes, but you also have rights, but duties and obligations. If you're a citizen, you have duties and obligations. If you're a taxpayer, you cross your arms and say, I want more and I'm not getting it. And for me, it's important to talk to a politician about that and say, try it. Try talking to people as citizens, not as taxpayers. You know, try, and then they want damage control. And you go, don't damage control, just try to be forthcoming, right? Don't try to get cute, just try to be honest, because in the end, the people will actually appreciate you being honest more than they'll appreciate you being clever, right? And you listen to an interview with a politician who's just spinning, and you can feel it. So that part of the work was interesting for that. But more than anything, I care about, in this case, I care about the climate. I was interviewing a rabbi recently about activism and, you know, what as a clergy, what is his attitude to activism? And I said, why is it? I've spent years trying to talk to people about climate change, and they just can't hear me. They just won't do any, like they think somebody should do something, but it ain't going to be them. Why? What is it that they need to have happen to them to understand this? And he just stopped for a second. He said, they need to stop and they need to hear that the earth is crying, that it's actually crying at this point in time. We are actually causing such pain. And I thought, you know, now, how do I find a way to have a politician talk about that without people going, what's he talking about, crying? Instead, how do I find a way to be effective with people to say, this isn't a rehearsal? Because one of the main points of I Thought He Was Dead of the book is that life is not a rehearsal. don't wait until, oh, when I retire, I'm going to have the life I really wanted. When I finish with this, I'll do something good for the environment. This is it. This is it. There is no rehearsal. I start the book with a whole piece about my walking out to go to the morning show at Jazz FM when I was the morning show host, and a clutch in my chest and thinking, what is that? And it ends up being angina, and I end up getting stents. And after that, a year later, I get cancer. And it's the mortality sinks in at that point, right? You just realize anybody could call you any day and go, we'd like you to come in for an appointment, please. And you realize they're going to sit you down and tell you, you have a life challenge ahead of you. So if we realize our mortality, then we can start to act with the urgency of a life that you need to live and things that need to get done, instead of nibbling at the edges, trying to keep everybody happy.
Why don't we do that? Do we think we're immortal, or we don't think
Yes.
we age?
Yes. So there's this wonderful story, Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. He has this wonderful story where he wrote a book after that. And in that book, he talks about the rabbi at his parents' synagogue in New Jersey. He works in Detroit. Comes up to him and says, I want you to write my eulogy when I die. And he goes, oh, Rabbi, look, I don't even go to synagogue. Like, you don't want me to do this. I'm only here for my parents. You are the iconic rabbi of the synagogue, and I'm really honored, but no. And the rabbi goes, that's nice. I still want you to do it. So the book's about 7 years of him getting to know the rabbi and doing his eulogy. But he counterpoints that with the story of an itinerant pastor who he'd been shot at, he'd been in prison, he was a drug addict, everything had fallen down. Then he had a turning and he becomes a pastor for mostly homeless people in Detroit and downtown Detroit. And Mitch took a shine to the guy, so he's writing articles about him to help him raise money to fix up this church with holes in the ceiling. And he goes to see one of his sermons, and the pastor says, everyone in this parish is going to die. We're all going to die. That is just the way of the world. And we have to think, what are we doing with our lives? We are going to die. And there's one guy in the front who's smiling through the whole thing. And the pastor can't resist anymore. He goes, excuse me, sir, why are you smiling? And he looks at him and he says, I'm not from this parish. And that's us. We actually think other people are going to die, but we're not going to die, right?
So I had, one person that told me one of the best ways to answer some of the questions that I guess that you're asking is to write your own obituary,
Yes.
or your own eulogy, and see if you like what you think would be written about you.
Yes.
And if you don't like it, then change it and write what you would like people to say, and then change your life so that what you would actually like being said would be said.
Yeah. So I do spiritual counseling one-on-one with people. Kind of spiritual companionship and counseling. And I have clients that I love being with, but I also do group work in Aging to Saging. And the first thing I get them to do is an obituary. And often they will say, well, died peacefully in his sleep with his loved ones around him at his home at age 98. And I say, well, that sounds lovely, but what is it to be 98? Is your spouse going to still be alive? Are your friends going to be alive? Or even all your children, God forbid, going to be alive? And what's it like physically to get out of a bed at 98 years of age? So do you really want to be 98? Or are you just trying to say, I'm going to outrun this sucker, right? So then they rewrite their obituary and they die at 76, which is within view. Right? If you're thinking, well, if I put it within view, or 81 and they're already 69, oh my God, well, let's do the math. There's 12 years there. That's not a lot of time. Nobody wants to do that. There's a woman, a rabbi who was one of my teachers who did Oh My God letters, which I also help people to do. And that is, she has 4 children. And one of them, she writes them each a letter that if she just dies suddenly, they can go, oh my God, Mom died? But then they can go to this file online or, in a filing cabinet and read a letter that she's written to them. So what you do is you write these things to your children, to your wife, to your partner, whatever, but you write them a letter. And then what happens is it changes the way you talk to them now, because you realize, what am I waiting for to tell these people how I feel about them?
You
And
write
it's,
people letters
yeah,
as
so
if that you were writing them from your deathbed.
you're already dead. And this is, they get to see what the last thing you want to tell them. I love you. I've always cared for you and admired you and worried for you. And you have inspired me as one of my children. I, when it broke my heart when this happened to you, and I was so proud of you when this happened. I want you to have a good life. You write all these things, and people often are writing them, and they just start crying
And
because
then
they
give it to them,
realize,
or just hold it in reserve
no,
and make sure you live
you
a
just,
life.
yeah, but you don't give it to them. You put it away for them so they can have it, but it changes the way you talk to them because you've done this and you thought, what am I waiting for? So, one guy, he wrote this, and then he called his son, who lived in Brooklyn and was a jazz musician, and he was a successful lawyer, and he was always putting some pressure on his son of, what are you doing, jazz? You're going to starve. Like, come home, go to law school. You'll be fine. I'll take care of you. And his son was always very resentful that his father wasn't respecting his choice. So he wrote an "Oh my God" letter to his son in our workshop. And then he called his son afterwards, and he for once didn't, sideways tell him he was on the wrong track. He just wanted to know, how was the last gig you did? How are you doing? How's your music coming along? And by the end of the conversation, they were both in tears together because he had shown respect for his son, and his son was just like, you hear me. And that all happened because he wrote out his thoughts. When you get things out of your head and onto paper sometimes, it's powerful, right?
How'd you get into spiritual counseling?
Um, I've always had a religious life. I remember I was on a thing once, and I said, oh, I'm religious. And then I kept talking about stuff. And I said, by the way, there was a whole bunch of you in the room just now who, when I said I'm religious, thought, he just said he's crazy. I'm not crazy, but I do come from a tradition, and it is part of my life. So my Jewish tradition is part of my life. So anyway, in doing that, at one point, I thought about, this was about 10 years ago, I thought, maybe I should go to rabbinical college and just become a rabbi, because it had always been an interest of mine. So I looked up this stuff and I realized I don't really want to do that, but here's something: spiritual director. You can become, and this is in the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, different religious traditions and non-religious traditions. But a spiritual director is a 3-year course that I took out of the United States with a cohort of people. And I really enjoyed doing it because it's a different kind of listening. It's not psychotherapy. My wife is a psychotherapist. I don't analyze people. I don't deal with clinical depression or things like that. But instead, what it is finding a way to develop the soul traits of a person, the different parts of a person. And some people's issue is as existential. It's, why am I here? What's the purpose of all this? And you often get people who'll come in and say, look, I don't believe in God. Okay, let's just get that out of the way. And first question is, okay, tell me about the God you don't believe in. And often by the time they're finished, they've described Santa Claus, right? Guy, white beard, throne, naughty and nice list, Santa God. So I say, okay, well, I get it. I don't believe that either. But what about just trying to connect yourself to the everythingness of life, that everything is connected to everything. And there's the beautiful patterns and things that go on. And how do you connect to that? How do you make yourself available to the present moment? So we work on meditation, we work on journaling, we work on character traits or soul traits, as we call them, to develop a curriculum for people which can help them to feel spiritually better and connected to others, heart to heart, not brain to brain.
Fascinating. You talked about wanting to live to your 98 and or wanting to only live to in your 70s, depending on sort of how you think that the rest of that life is going to continue, I guess, from a health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, from who's going to be around, what you're going to be doing, etc. I've seen several people die, pass away, as all of us have. None of them, it's never been pretty. And my father used to have a line that you always leave a party while you're still having fun. I've always wondered if that applies to life.
I don't think so. I actually don't think so. I think you got to respect the journey, whatever the journey. If your attitude towards dying, the old joke, Dustin Hoffman wanted on his headstone, I knew this would happen, right? If your attitude towards death is that it is finite, that it is a tragedy, it is the worst possible thing that could happen, when actually it's an inevitability and it's a journey and it's another part of life. It depends how you're looking at it. There can be physical pain, but frankly, for a lot of people these days, there's not a lot of physical pain. There's a lot of pain medications which take you out of the zone of being present. There's a beautiful book by Stephen Jenkinson, who's a Canadian, who was in palliative care for 25 years, called Die Wise. And one of the things he says that I talk about in the book is life is not merely the human lifespan. Life is a much bigger thing than that. But the human lifespan is our mortal moment to do something with it. And that's it. The rest is unknowable and a mystery, and we should be part of it. But if it's leave a party while you're still having fun, well, then, people would just go, well, I think this disease eventually will get bad for me. I'll kill myself now.
He says that the assisted suicide rules?
Well, it could be. I mean, he says people don't want to be dying. They only want to be dead. Because we don't want the process of dying. We'd rather just be dead. It's too terrifying because we're afraid that there is nothing, that it just ends and that this was for nothing. So those are big questions. Those are some of the things you can deal with in spiritual direction.
We're chatting tonight with Ralph Benmurgui, who is the author of a book, I Thought He Was Dead, which is a book about, I guess, life and about living a good life in your final years. And Ralph, are talking about changing ageism to sageism, which sounds like a great line to me. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Ralph in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. Ralph Benmurgui is a gentleman that I interacted with in politics, and then during the Mississauga Summit, I ended up interacting with him when he was advising the president of Sheridan College. Unbelievably interesting gentleman with a fascinating background, and always had very profound things to say. And he's now written a book, I Thought He Was Dead, which is about ageism to sageism, about how we should become a sage in our last couple of decades of life, I guess. Ralph, what motivated you to write the book?
I think there were times in my life where I thought maybe I could write a book, and I think, I don't know if I have enough to say about anything. And I guess I just got to a point where I had stopped, doing jobs where you go in every single day and you hammer away at things. And it gave me some time. It started to come to me that really there are important issues about spirituality and about, quality of life, basically, whether you're 30 or you're 75. There was just something in that I thought we need a conversation. I mean, one of the biggest reasons was that I believe that we've lost the spiritual thread. We've given it away to extreme versions of religions. And anyone who ventures into that territory is perceived as being that kind of person. Like, if you want to kill the buzz at any dinner party, there's two ways to do it. One is to talk about climate change, and the other one is to say God. You say that, and it's, oh, come on. We don't do that anymore. It's not where we're at. So for me, I think it's been a question of being able to, first of all, talk about what I thought God was, because I think it's important to define terms. So for me, God is not a noun. It's not a thing.
God is not a noun. What do you mean by that?
It's not a guy. It's not a thing. It's not this, this solid object we can talk about or two in my life. God is a verb. God is an action. We are in the middle of that action. So I always use the example of, and I use it in the book, of if a star goes nova and explodes, then the energy from that explosion pushes together neighboring gases that creates a new star. And that, now think, there are, this is beyond comprehension, 1,000,000,000,000,000,000,000 stars in the known universe.
1,000,000,000,000,000,000 stars.
Yes, in the known universe. More stars than there are grains of sand on the planet Earth. That's what science has told us. So try to put your head around the idea that we are the only thing that matters and that we have this deity that we're in a conversation with. I can't do that. For me, I can only say I am a microscopic cell in the body of a universe. And my only job is either to be a healthy cell or a cancerous cell. If I want to be a cancerous cell, that's my karma. That's what I'm going to be. But I can try to be a healthy cell. I can try to be of use to people and try to be decent, even though I'll fail, a good 35, 40% of the time. At least I'll try. So for me, it's an ongoing creative process. Stars create new stars. People create new people. We can't stop ourselves from the act of creation. It's what we do. It's what the universe does. You and I are literally made out of wasted stardust, literally, physically. So if you take those things into account, then you can start to see spiritual life in a different way than a dialogue with a highly judgmental God that is very male and very centered on, when people say to me, God is love, and I think, hey, do you read your Bible? Because God is also the one who says, you know what? You're going to have to kill every man, woman, and child in that nation because they're in your place. So go and kill them. So if that's love, I don't know. So I try to just use things like scriptures, Jewish scriptures in my case, as metaphors. So Pharaoh, or Yul Brynner as we know him, but Pharaoh is not about the real Pharaoh, Ramses II in our story. It's about the inner tyrant that rules our lives, that tells us it will not set us free. And then when the Israelites become free out in the desert, in nowhere land, they can't handle it. I mean, Moses is gone for 15 days and they start building the calf. So I knew it, he just left us out here, schmuck, way to go. And here we are. Because it's a story about human fallibility and there are metaphors all the way through it. To be a literalist about Bible, to me, is just missing the point. So I love the poetry and the mystery of life, and I love the science of life. I love the pursuit of fact, the rigor of science and discovery. I love all that. They're not incompatible. They just have their place in our lives. And I think we've lost the spirit part of our lives. God is, for most people, gone, and we are now God. It doesn't matter.
I grew up in a reasonably religious family. My brother was a minister in the church, and I went to church camp. I was a church youth group leader, and I've done sermons in different denominations within the Christian church, etc. But I often, and maybe, it's your line about don't mention God at a dinner party, but I often don't tell people about my religious part of my life. And some people are, surprised when they hear about it because I don't talk about it. And one person I was speaking to at one point in time, and I explained this to, said, and I'm not familiar as much as I should be with the Jewish faith, but said that Christians have given Christianity a bad name. And I think it's this literal reading that some right-wing Christian churches have of the Bible, of the Christian Bible, that that I disagree with completely. And I guess I'm far more in your camp of a metaphoric reading of the Bible that tends to make sense. But why is it that Christianity has become defined by the extremists? And I think at times lots of other religions have become defined by the extremists, not necessarily by the mainstream or by more, I've gone to Reform Jewish churches and felt extremely comfortable. I've gone to some more progressive Christian churches and felt very comfortable. I've gone to some more progressive Muslim mosques and felt very comfortable, but I've also found the opposite.
Right. So there's two things there, I think. One is that what we look for in our media storytelling is caricature and conflict quite often, right? So if I want to do a story about Jewish people, if I have Orthodox Jews that look like they're from 1843 Poland with big black hats and long coats and white shirts and big beards and payas, big sideburns that grow long, I've got everyone going, oh, that's a Jew. If I want to portray someone from the Muslim faith and have read nothing of the Quran and know nothing of the Muslim faith, then I will be gravitating towards the conflict of the culture war of the extreme Muslim and the extreme Christian. I went to Joel Osteen's church in Houston. It is the former Houston Rockets arena. And over the course of a weekend, 35,000 people show up. Now, I went down, on the way down there, people were saying to me, oh, those people are crazy. And as a journalist at the time, I thought, no, this is not how you find a story. You don't just walk in going, well, they're crazy, let's write about them. I thought, what is it that these people are yearning for that they're getting out of this experience? And what they were yearning for was community, was family, was meaning, was purpose. And that these things aren't being provided, in my opinion, in a high neoliberal extractive capitalist society like ours. There, like I said about work, there is very little spiritual meaning to any of the things we do. We're not interested in getting that from people. We're not interested in doing it. On the other hand, if I go to a U2 concert, in Poland where they don't speak English, they're in congregation. They're yearning for community and they're waving their phones going, still haven't found what I'm looking for. They don't even know what the hell they're singing, but they're doing it. It's like the Latin Mass, right? You don't know what you're singing. It's gibberish, but you're doing it together, gibberish together. So we find ways to come together. But the other part of this is post-Enlightenment, we have become rational. Prove God is what I hear. Okay, prove love. You look for it, you yearn for it, your heart's broken when you think you've lost it, but you can't hold it. You can't put it in a bottle. It's just this thing of love. So not everything is knowable, but we have become so arrogant as human beings because we are not stewards of the earth. We're dominion of the earth people. This is ours and we'll do what we want with it. So that arrogance has led us away from the kind of humility that's required to sort of bend your knee to a billion trillion stars and say, wow, this is bigger than me. So we are now the biggest thing in the picture. So God, remember 1960s Time magazine, God is dead. And for most people, God is dead because they're taught that pediatric version of God and they just move on. So the biggest movement right now is I'm spiritual, but not religious, which is fine to say, but where are the sustaining pieces that allow that spirituality to grow? It's not an occasional good walk in the woods. You've got to have, I think, a fitness program. If you want a spiritual six-pack, you got to work out. So in the Jewish religion, there's a Sabbath every week. It's good if you do it. If the whole world took a day to unplug for 25 hours, the whole world, our GHG emissions would go down by 7% immediately.
That's the solution to climate change, the Sabbath.
Right. It's one of the major, well, look, it's the best gift Judaism has for the world is Sabbath, by far. There's a beautiful book by Heschel on the Sabbath, and it's just, it is an architecture in time. It is not in space, it's in time. And just the ability to back out, just the ability to stop.
So do you honor the Sabbath? Do you unplug for a day?
Yeah. And a friend of mine, we were walking in one of the beautiful trails here in Hamilton, the Shadow Trail. We were walking, and it was a kind of a windy day. And he goes, "Let's just stop." And we stopped, and there were all these thin, tall trees with foliage in the crown at the top, but not much at the bottom. And in the wind, you could hear them clacking against each other, and basically just talking, just click, 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 click. And up until then, we'd been, and we just stopped and listened. And this is the world. This is what's actually going on. So when extremism and literalism is about a desire for certainty. And as the Chinese say, to be uncertain is uncomfortable, to be certain is ridiculous. You know, I don't need, when someone starts telling me that they know the exact architecture of the afterlife, I think, you're kidding, right? Like, we're not there. There's no possible way we can know this.
But isn't this incredible desire for certainty that's led to all these conspiracy theorists and people that are QAnon believers and, you know, et cetera, et cetera? They find this little community that you say people want on social media, and they have certainty.
Yes, and I also think that it's a reaction to what they can't accept. They just can't. It's too much for them. There's got to be another reason. And it's a desire for control of your life. But it's also a misguided attempt to deal with the fact that we are extractive capitalism and surveillance capitalism, and there's great stuff written on books on this, is what we live in. So are they really that far off when they say that they're out to capture our lives and take them from us? If I look up a king-size bed tomorrow on my on the internet, I'm going to get ads about king-size beds for the next 6 months. So if I write in an email, you know, these jihadists might have a point, I'm now on a watch list. So that's underneath people. So when they see something else, they attach to it and go, you see, now they're going to stick stuff right into us. So it's irrational, but it's based on not having control of your life. So yeah, they want certainty, and literalists want certainty. For me, the best advice I ever got was when somebody said, stay confused. Stop trying to, get the answer. Just let yourself stay confused. That's where the fun is.
So how do you become a sage in the autumn of your life?
I think by making conscious the fact that you are in the autumn of your life, number one. Number two, find a curriculum that helps you to, like we spoke of at the beginning, who do you love? What are you proud of? What do you regret? What do you want to be remembered for? An oh my God letter. Like, start doing the things that make the journey conscious. Because what we're doing now, in many cases, is backing into that part of life. One of the things of the Sabbath is you have a challah, an egg loaf bread. And the third thing you do is the second thing you do, first you light candles to say that's the end of 6 days of doing and the beginning of 1 day of being. And then you do a blessing over the bread. And in the Moroccan tradition, I'm Moroccan, you rip the bread off, dip it in salt for the tears of slavery. And slavery is what we do to ourselves, by the way, not somebody else. We enslave ourselves to all kinds of things, the right house, the right car, the right thing. So you dip, and then you throw to everybody a piece of bread and they eat it. But it goes by age. So when you're in your family, who cares? Everybody knows everybody's age, right? It's no big whoop. But when you're sitting in a group of people, some of whom you're meeting for the first time, and you have to turn to them and go, how old are you? And this is this great mortal sin of age. You're actually asking me how old I am? Yeah. What are you afraid of? I'm 65. What's the problem? And you realize it's a problem because we want to back into it. We want to back into age. We want to back into death. We don't want to turn forward and walk into it. So for saging, you have to decide to turn around and walk into this because it's beautiful. It's a place that you can only get to when you get to it. You can't be 22 and walk into that forest of age. You got to be there. And think about the way you talk and think as a person now and what you were like as a 20-year-old. And when you look at one of your kids and you think, wow, it's like the Mark Twain thing. I left home at 16, and when I returned at 20, it's amazing how much my father had learned.
I have a friend that refers to his age as level. He says, I'm not 62 years old, I'm level 62. Changes his attitude a little bit.
Yeah. So if we're not proud of it, if we spend years, making sure we don't go gray, because gray is just a hint of death, right? If we stop to, okay, in the book I talk about movies and television. 5% of characters in movies and television are over 65. I got this from The Guardian. A guy wrote an article, really good article about it. And of those 5%, the overwhelming majority of characterizations are incompetent, incontinent, grouchy, inappropriate, lecherous, demented. That's what we see. 65 plus is a punchline of, Granny who says the worst possible thing at the dinner party, not people who have something to offer. So
how do you reconcile that with last year, 2 70-year-olds ran for president in the United States?
Well, look what one of them kept saying about the other one. What Trump kept saying about Biden is he's slow. What they kept talking about with him was how he was basically incompetent and didn't know where he was. And then when Trump had to be helped down a flight of, gradual steps on a ramp, everybody showed the picture. You see, he's not able to do this. In most cultures, most leaders are over 70 and on their way to 80. In our culture, nobody says old and improved. They only say young and new and improved, but nobody says old and improved. And yet they have things to offer. Look, Joe Biden gets up every day and is the president of one of the most complex countries on earth. He can handle it, right? So I love that happens. But on the other hand, I don't think that that's the way we see people most of the time. I mean, Bernie Sanders, people were thinking, no, you're going to be 82. That's ridiculous. You can't be the president at 82. But Biden will be in his 80s by the time this is over. So in one way, I appreciate it. Canadian leaders, they keep getting younger, right? Because we're still stuck on, that's supposed to be vital. I wouldn't mind a 72-year-old being the Prime Minister of Canada because they might bring some wisdom to the table. They might just not, but they might.
They might. Ralph, it's been a pleasure chatting with you tonight. Remind us the name of the book and where we can get it.
I Thought He Was Dead, a spiritual memoir, and you can pick it up. You can order it from any local bookstore. Hey, I'd like you to order I Thought He Was Dead for me. Or you can go to Amazon and Indigo and, with their unevenness, they still manage to be delivering the book to people all the time. So just go online, and my publisher is Woolsack and Wynn. So that is another website you can go to, which if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook, you'll see that I try to help people with that as well.
Ralph Benmurgui, thank you so much for joining us. I Thought He Was Dead. Sounds like a book I'm going to have to get. I hope maybe someone will buy it for Christmas for me. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, Brian, you take care of yourself.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks, everyone. Good night.